Okay, aloha everyone. This is Helani Sonora Pale with Lāhui Updates. Today is Sunday, August 23rd. And tonight's topic is Kuleana lands on the island of Maui in the areas of Kahoma and Kaua'ula. So tonight we have three panelists. We're still waiting for Keeaumoku to come on, but we have Kapali Keahi, who is a kama'aina of Lahaina and lineal descendant of the Kuleana landowners of Kahoma Valley. And we have attorney Lance Collins, who has been involved with Keeaumoku Kapu's case in Kaua'ula, another Kuleana landowner. And so we're just waiting on Keeaumoku, but we'll get started with just kind of like the introductions for now. And Keeaumoku will be on soon. Okay, so can we start with you, Kapali?
Sure, aloha. Aloha kako, thank you for joining us. Thank you for zooming in. My name is Kapali Keahi. I come from Lahaina. I'm a lineal descendant of several valleys, but I will be talking about Kahoma in particular. So aloha again.
Okay, great. Mahalo, Kapali. Kapali comes from a real long time Lahaina ohana, big ohana, the Keahi ohana. Okay, so Lance, a little bit about yourself, please.
Okay. My name is Lance Collins, and I'm an attorney, and I practice primarily on the island of Maui. I live in Makawao, and I got involved with one of Keeaumoku Kapu's Kuleana cases after Richard McCarty passed away unexpectedly in 2015. And since then, I actually have gotten involved in a couple of his Kuleana cases. At this moment, there are two that are pending before the Hawaii Supreme Court, one that he's represented by Dan Gluck, and the other one by myself and Bianca Isaki. And the other case, which we took to a jury, and the jury found that Keeaumoku and his family had an interest in the Kuleana and that the land company didn't have an interest back in April, was affirmed by the Intermediate Court of Appeals. And the land company actually is seeking the Supreme Court to review that. But but they have basically, we won't know for another month because they have some time before they can decide whether they're going to take it or not. We don't think there are grounds for it. So, but we'll see what they do.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Lance Collins, attorney. You're now on Maui, right, Lance?
That's right. I've moved back to Maui, so I'm not back and forth anymore. Now
awesome.
I'm here full time.
Thank you so much for helping Kuleana landowners and in our struggles. It's hard to find an attorney that will help us for free. I mean, half the time, and we should be paying our attorneys. That's what, hopefully we can do a fundraiser for that. So just kind of give a background a little bit about what are Kuleana lands as we're waiting for Keeaumoku to come on. We're still waiting for him to come on. What are Kuleana lands? So Kuleana lands, for those of you who don't have any idea of what they are, they were lands that were granted by Kau'i Keauli, King Kamehameha III, to tenant farmers between 1850 and 1855. These lands were small lands, on average about 2 to 3 acres, and usually it was 2 parcels that they got. So they could only claim the lands that they were actually cultivating or living on. They couldn't claim any of the fallow lands or any of the other lands. And, there are some Kuleana lands that are like 5 acres, some down to less than 1 acre. So it really kind of ranges, but they're really tiny. They were given to 8,205 Kanaka Maoli or tenant farmers who were currently occupying that lands back in 1850 and 1855. And they got about less than 1% of all the lands in Hawaii, less than 1%. So that's very tiny, minuscule number. I think it comes down to like 50,000 acres of land, which is not much. So that's in 1850. So over 170 years, our people have been struggling to hold on to these lands. And and I just want to share some info. Oh, here, Keamoku's on, yay. Okay, sorry, so we're gonna add Keamoku on. Here we go. Promote to panelists, okay. There you go, we got Keamoku on now. Aloha Keamoku.
Hi, aloha.
Aloha Keamoku Kapu.
Kalamai.
No, that's okay. No worries. I know that track up that valley is so harsh. So I was thinking, oh, you're probably stuck on the rocks or something. So can you just share a little bit about yourself, Keamoku? Would you just finish with introductions?
Yeah, okay. My name is Keamoku Kapu. I live in Kaua'ula Valley. I am a lineal descendant to the place. And just a little bit background, for the past 20 some odd years, I've sat on a whole bunch of commissions. So I know of quite a bit of what I have experienced throughout the years. I sat on the Cultural Resources Commission. I sat on the Maui Lanai Island Barrel Council for 8 years. I also sat on the Native Hawaiian Historic Preservation Council for an advisory for the Board of Trustees of Office of Hawaiian Affairs. I also sat on West Pacific Fisheries Management Council as an advisory council is to look at rights, native tenant rights when it came to fishing. And I'm a political wreck. Basically, what I wanted to do was go home to our ancestral lands and just basically plant kalo and continue the traditions of what my family did. Yeah. So, while about we mahalo Hialani for setting this up, for allowing us this dialogue so we can kuka and talk stories about our endeavors.
Mahalo for all your work. I mean, over 20 years fighting for Kuleana land rights and to be recognized. 170 years we have been on our lands. And when you think about Kuleana landowners, you have to think about this. They were actually occupying the lands that they claimed in 1850. So we weren't on our lands for 170 years. We were on our lands for at least 170 years. We were there prior to that. We had to, when you read the testimonies of from the Mahele, we had to actually give testimony of how our ohana got that land, whether it was because one of our ancestors was a good warrior under Alapa Inui's army, so forth, and as a reward we got those lands. So there's a whole history beyond the 170 years, going back hundreds of years. So I just wanted to share that. But thank you, Keamoku, for coming and joining us.
Mahalo.
We did go over what Kuleana lands are a little bit for people that don't understand what Kuleana lands are. And so we're just going down to kind of what rights are attached to Kuleana lands, okay? So when you look at the Kuleana lands, land rights, and what's attached to the lands, we have as tenant farmers rights to water, rights to access, rights to gather, rights to farm, rights to build a dwelling, rights to fish. There's all these lands that are attached to Kuleana lands, and that's the real significance of Kuleana lands, because those rights are inseverable. You cannot sever those rights away. It's part of who we are, and it was part of why we got those lands. So a question I had for Lance, and I know Lance is an attorney that has litigated or helped to litigate cases with Keamoku and is familiar with land rights. So question for Lance is, do Kuleana land rights transfer when we transfer to a non-Kuleana land descendant? So like, let's say if someone else, if our whole family sold our Kuleana land and we sold it to someone out of Hawaii, would our rights to fish, gather, build a hale transfer over to them? Just wondering.
Well, it's a little bit complicated.
Yeah, it is.
So
yeah.
there are certain rights that when a piece of land is they call it landlocked, by other land. There are certain requirements of the neighboring landowners under Anglo-American law. And so there's some overlap between some of the rights of native tenants and what is allowed by basically anybody who's landlocked. And then, but with respect to things like some of the rights of native tenants, which aren't applicable in Anglo-American law, I don't believe that basically someone who is not a native tenant or a descendant of the people in the Ahupua'a or Moku would be able to claim a traditional or customary right on neighboring lands unless they were a native person, a lineal descendant of that area, at least under Hawaii law. And the Supreme Court has sort of kind of seesawed back and forth about how extensive that is for native lineal descendants, but definitely they haven't extended it to people who are not lineal descendants.
Right. And just feel free to jump in, Kapali. Or
yeah, just no, it's good that Lance has given a good description of that, because what we understand totally is that these rights, well, at least what we believe is that these rights cannot be transferred over. Excuse me. These rights cannot be transferred over to anyone else other than, especially because the lands are directly awarded to a specific family, and it's only that his heirs and successors who actually have that right.
Mhm.
And it should not carry over to anyone else except his heirs and successors. Yeah, so that's my understanding of it as well. It's for their benefit.
And there's actually lots of cases that uphold ancient tenancy to, even if you're not a Kuleana landowner, you have certain rights to access, to gather, to, fish, and so forth. So
yeah, because those things are held in common. That's why.
Right. Yeah. So ancient tenancy is something that and correct me if I'm wrong, Lance Collins, correct me if I'm wrong, but ancient tenancy seems to be something where the land cannot be severed from the people. Our rights to those traditional and customary rights on those lands cannot be severed. It's even if we sold our Kuleana lands, even our rights to gather and to access would still be there.
Yeah, that was in the last TMT opinion. That was one of the things that they had to go back and amend and remove, because there was a footnote that almost seemed to imply that there had to be, in order for somebody to claim traditional and customary rights in a particular place, that they and their ancestors had to have an unbroken use for 200 years of a particular piece of land. And there were a lot of groups, Native Hawaiian Legal Corporation, a number of environmental law professors at the Richardson Law School, who asked the Supreme Court to reconsider that, because
I remember that.
And they did. They ended up deleting it from their opinion, because that hasn't been what the law is, and I think that then, because nobody really briefed it really well anyways, it wasn't appropriately before the Supreme Court, so they just decided to delete that.
And I brought this topic up because there seems to be some misunderstanding in Kahoma right now with who has access to water, because a lot of those lands are landlocked that they're trying to sell up there to outsiders or to non-lineal descendants or non-cultural descendants of that place. A lot of those lands don't have access to water, and traditional access is only reserved to the Kuleana landowners. And that's why I brought that up. You want to say anything about that, Kapali? I think he just froze. Keaaumoku, you have anything to say about that? Yeah. Oh, yeah.
What comes to mind to me is, I've always said it, and it's written on a lot of our signs. So So basically what came about was this work, extensive work that was done in Harvard and all these universities to define what basically that means. So there's a whole context of understanding. When you look at Uakoike Kuleana Nakanaka, the right of the native tenant, it talks about those specific rights that was allotted to the families during the time of the Mahele. And these things was written and covenanted in the what is that, the titles that was transferred during the time of the Mahele and placed in the indices of words to quiet land titles. So that's a whole different big huge pandanus box of what rights that we have that is continual from the time when the properties was awarded from our Kūpuna, and what rights that basically came down through interstate succession by blood, and those rights could have never been taken away from us. So even if somebody claims that they've purchased our kupuna and sell an interest of the property, it depends on how many kupuna at that time was there. And it doesn't automatically say that just because one kupuna sold the property over, that he can sell 100% interest, which now relinquish the rights of the native tenant. So there's a lot of how would you say, speculations today by so-called people who really doesn't understand. And me, I only going based upon my true beliefs of why I stand on that mountain today, and the belief system that I understand, and also being guided by, my people that I highly respect, and one is Lance Collins, to make sure that he's driving me in the direction that I need to go, so I have clear understanding of Hawaii Revised Statute 7-1, Native Gathering Rights, the Constitution, Article 12, Section 7 of the Hawaii State Constitution, to make sure that our rights are protected on a state level. That basically trickles down to the time of the Kanawai, or the laws of the kingdom. So when we get into those kind of discussions on whether or not non-Hawaiians have the same rights as Native Hawaiians, I don't see that. Even when I read the indices of wars and how the properties was transferred, even when I read a lot of the history from our Kūpuna, the native testimonies that was left behind, and what type of rights that our Kūpunas had, all that, the census reports. I mean, there's a whole window of opportunity to really clearly understand. But if you're looking at it in an Americanized way, when you look at properties or TMKs, then all that is like hogwash. To me, that's hogwash.
Yeah, you cannot look at Kuleana land rights and ownership in a Western way.
Yeah,
it was
exactly.
created during the time of the Hawaiian Kingdom, and it was based on more of a European feudal kind of system. They based it more on like on a European system of land, sharing and ownership, more communal. But
yeah,
it's really not American at all. And one of the things that did come up in the ledge this past year, Kuleana lands was brought up in House Bill 2386. And it was kind of an interesting bill, because it was regarding a farmer in, I don't know if it was in Kauai or Maui, but this farmer.
Yeah, I think it was Kauai.
Kauai, yeah.
Yeah.
I know Kapua Sprout was on top of this issue. And he was landlocked, but he had brought this land that was landlocked, and he wanted to gain easement. Revise the Hawaii Revised Statute 7-1 to include people like him. He was not Kanaka. He didn't have a genealogical tie to those lands. He wanted to give rights to people like him, the right to access those lands, easement rights. And so he tried to actually attempt to revise Hawaii Revised Statute 7-1, which is in pertaining to Kuleana lands and Kuleana land rights in state law. So what is important, and from what I heard from you, Keaaumoku, is that genealogy is important, that it is, and that's one of the first things we tell Kuleana land owners and people who are trying to regain back their rights to their Kuleana lands, or trying to find their way back home. Is the first thing you do is you do your genealogy.
Yeah, in kind of an interesting way, but Because say for instance, if a family was to be summoned for a quiet title adverse possession, and they, you know, the law is they gotta produce them 3 times, public notice, then they set the date for trial that somebody filed a complaint on a Kūpuna who died in 1872 to summon the heirs forward because they want to quiet the title. Um, so what basically I've learned throughout the years that the first time I went in court, I went inside there with just like a cheat sheet to figure out, okay, I do have standings. You go in court, the judge mentions, okay, is anybody here on behalf of heirs of so and so that filed the complaint? You go in front, they put your name down, the attorney sends you the complaint, then you would have to answer to the complaint. Throughout the years, out of the many quiet titles I've been in, you know, I lost a lot from the beginning, not realizing that in the most simplistic way, when they said that you have to figure out whether or not you tied to these properties genealogically, but the process, because the judge doesn't understand. If you can show him a pedigree chart, and he's not going to understand that. And for me, I tried to do it that way, and in 60 seconds, you said judgment to the plaintiff. And it's been continual for me until we started to understand, in order for we to prove that we are the person we claim to be, we had to do it in an affidavit form. And the affidavit basically showed that I am so and so, and this is my track, using certified documents like my birth certificate, my death, my parents' marriage certificate, all these records or documents that you would need to show that you have an unbroken chain of title all the way from the time of the person that received it. So when you're going in front of these people in an arbitrary way, their job is to prove you're not the person you claim to be, so they can literally say, okay, these families have abandoned their rights to the property. They haven't been there, so give us the right to adverse possession claim. But if there is a possibility where I may still own an undivided interest, and these guys cannot claim that they own 100% interest, then the affidavit is really important to prepare families to go forward to make sure that they have that. If they don't have that, then it makes the attorney's job even harder to figure out how they need to pursue the case. It's the way I understand it.
And so we've been talking a lot about undivided interest and interest. So if people don't understand that, what happens with Kuleana lands is that it actually passes down to all the children, to the heirs, unless specified in the will. So if the original land mahele awardee specified in their will, they're only going to give it to one son, and then it's that son and that heirs. But if, again, it's really complex, but it's like it's multiple layers of generations, and the number of heirs has just multiplied for these tiny parcels of land, and that's pretty much been the case. And I was going to share just a picture of Kahoma, one of the areas we're talking about. If Kapali can describe a little bit about Kahoma and where this is, and if you can talk a little bit if there's burials or what's going on there.
Well, so my tutu, they come from inside Kanaha and Kahoma as well. The first thing that needs to be said is that their entire valley was known for kalo. The designation that Lahaina currently has as a historic district is due to the fact that these lands were very famous for kalo. Kahoma, Kanaha, Kaua'ula were the main kalo lands of Lahaina, and so all of our families were the kalo farmers. Some serving as even under the Hawaiian government as well. But there are burials all over this place, especially where most of my tutu are born and Uakanu'ia, where they were buried up on top of Kukui Kapu and Keoihuihu. This is a Wahipana, definitely. And of course, the main taro lands to the bottom of the valley. So we have burials on top of the pu'u. We also have terraces of burials that we know of as well. Alongside these cliffs are caves. And these are things that we don't normally talk about because, you know, they should not be brought out into the open. But in these last, you know, several weeks or so, we've been compelled to explain to the general public, you know, the importance of these places, because we are currently in the fight to restore these valleys to what it once was. The main taro lands of Lahaina. These are very historic places, very important places, and under tremendous threat and pressure on the part of the land companies. It's really only certain land companies are very particular in terms of the those who are we are in opposition against. Over the last 20 or so years, of course, we've been in a land struggle here in the Moku of Lahaina, and whether it be from Olowalu all the way out to Honokohau, we've been in a fight to either quell a lot of the development, water rights, destruction to our sacred places, our significantly archaeological sites, our burials and such. But we also have a deep respect and yearning to go back and farm our taro lands. And these are the lands that were basically held, controlled. The accesses were controlled, I should say, to a lot of these places by the plantations for a very long time. So we're very much resisting the plantation system at this point. We find that there's no other way to go about restoring our families back to the land without resisting the plantation system. And the only reason why there's a housing crisis is because there's a land crisis to begin with. And the plantations have benefited, and it goes all the way back to, it all kind of ties into the overthrow of our kingdom. Why did they actually do that? Well, it was because it was so the plantations could benefit from that. And what about our people? Did our people benefit from American intrusion? Aole. So here we are today. We're basically answering the call of our ancestors. We're heeding their call to go back to the land. We know that we have interests in these lands.
Yeah.
We know we do. Absolutely. Nobody else is going to care for these burials except us. Nobody else is going to care for these taro lands. I mean, the developers can go raise taro too, I would assume. They can all do that too. But as far as we're concerned, Kahoma Valley, if it wasn't for our families, there wouldn't be a river today. Almost 10 years ago, we worked with Kamehameha schools, of course, but our families wanted to put that river back. We wanted to restore that river. We knew that was the first thing that needed to happen in order for us to restore that valley back to, its kalo making history. And so we got together as Ohana, Pilikoko to the area of Kahoma, especially. And there were many other families who came and supported us as well. I mean, from Olowalu all the way out to Honokahua and such. So it was a very there was a lot of people from the community who helped to restore this stream as well. But that being said, our families, it was, we determined that we needed to put this river back. Otherwise, this river would have continued to be diverted, and it was already diverted for over 100 years. It would have been it would have continued to be diverted, especially for more development, for the plantations and for tourism and for greenways and landscaping. Um, uh, uh, so so we find that in this valley, if we didn't restore the stream, this water would have still been diverted by the very land company who is in there today trying to assert their claims on lands that we have claims to. They're the ones that are trying to sell the lands, our Kuleana lands, Ali'i lands as well. There are crown lands as well in there. The personal lands of Ali'i that are in there as well. Luna Lilo in particular. He has a lot of land in this area, uh, they are trying to control the headwaters, um, the watershed in all of these hydrologically significant areas of Maui, and we're gonna oppose that as much as we can. We're gonna stem their flow of power over our resources, and and we're definitely getting started over here in Kahoma. It was over 10 years ago when we restored the stream. It took about 6 years for that stream to actually connect to the ocean, to reach the ocean, have continuous flow to the ocean. And so, you know, uh, the Kalepa Ohana has been raising kalo in that valley for years now. Since they were able to get water to the lo'i, they actually planted before they even had water in their lo'is, and again, a very conscious effort on the part of the community to come and help out with the Kalepa Ohana to restore some of their lo'i patches up in the valley. But we need more, and we need to restore the rest of this valley. But of course, the main things that we're trying to accomplish right now, I guess, what is the priority on the place is to stop a lot of the desecration to the burials. This land company has no idea um, who is buried in those areas. A lot of them a lot of the burials, of course, have been since time immemorial, and we have a very we have a very careful touch about um, uh, we want to be as careful as we possibly can in this valley. But that is not the sentiment that this land company shares. They do have an idea of perhaps, um, taking care of the place too, but so far they've used heavy machinery. They've already exposed, or I should say, destroyed lo'i in the area. Um, the State Historic Preservation Division may not be the best agency to protect lo'i, but I believe that because because Lahaina is a significant place and it is known for its lo'i, that should be something that should be protected. And if they're not the agency to do that, then we're gonna do it. But they've already destroyed lo'i in the area. They're selling it to people who actually have good intentions. I believe there are several families in there that actually have good intentions to malama aina. However, they do not know where the burials are, and they're intruding upon lands that continue to be they're intruding upon lands that actually still have Kuleana descendants in our area who are trying to reclaim them. And so that's kind of the problem that we have up in Kahoma where we actually clashing with the land company because they're trying to alienate our lands, and we need to protect our burials as well. But ultimately, we need to be on those lands. We need to be living there and exercising our rights to those lands so that we can malama aina for the next generation, of course. That's a really good picture. I mean, of the two valleys, of course. There's actually three valleys that are in there. There's actually Halona as well. Halona actually meets up with Kahoma in the more greener section of the mountain, of course. And then those two rivers meet up with the Kanaha River, and that forms the Kahoma stream, and it ends up right down in the area known as Mala, also known as Moli'i, also known as Alamihi.
So Kahoma is the left side, yeah? Left side of the picture.
Yes, Kahoma is the left side of the picture. Kahoma, and then there's that little valley in the middle, the little squiggly valley in the middle, that's Halona.
Okay. And that's Lahaina on the bottom there.
Yes, this is all of Lahaina. It's, that upper part would be Paunao as well.
Okay.
But we're all within the district of Lahaina, of course.
Got it. And then the right side is Kaua'ula.
Kaua'ula is actually
More to the right.
more to the right, actually.
Okay.
More to the right. It's not in the picture.
Okay.
But that's Kanaha. So I don't know if you can see Pu'upa'upa'u. Right where your cursor was. That's Pu'upa, to the right some more. That bigger mountain, to the right some more.
Okay.
Past the valley. Okay, this is Kanaha where your cursor is right now.
Okay.
That is Kanaha. So my tutu also come from in that valley too. Taro farmers as well. They took care of a lot of other Ohana's taro patches in there too. My tutu also took care of the water intake. They worked under the Hawaiian Kingdom as well as into the territory. They took care of that intake. Our family's land, we refer to that land as the intake property, but the intake, the county claims to own today, is actually on my family's property. Haya.
Haya. That's a big Maui family. Haya. I know Honake Trask and Mililani Trask are Hayas.
Yes. Yeah.
Many Hayas.
From
Hana. They're originally from Hana too, yeah?
Yeah, exactly.
Awesome. Okay, mahalo. Hey, thanks Kapali for that. Mahalo nui loa. So let's kind of hear from Keaomoku on Kaua'ula. So I get one picture. I have a picture of your homestead up there.
Yeah.
Okay.
Let me go check.
Okay.
There we go.
Yeah.
So is it?
Oh, you're spying on my place. You're spying you. Well, Kaua'ula, no different than Kahoma and Kanaha. This area, in fact, they did through Kepa Valley and Kamehameha schools and adjoining landowners got together to do an extensive study of this valley. And the reason why they did this extensive study is because of all the litigation we've been having in the past. So with the help of Kepa Valley and the help of a lot of resources out there, historical resources, they put together a book called He Wa'i Mo'olelo Kaua'ula. And the history, because it's direct from the bottom of the place was known as the Crown, where Moku'ula was, within that whole Ahopua going all the way Mauka. The extensive study covered a lot of mana'o about the taro cultivation that happened in that valley. We have, I would say, pretty close to 6,000 taro patches in that valley, from the Vau Kanaka area, which would be from the bottom all the way to the top, to the Vau Kele, which was a productive area in Kaua'ula. The historical background of that place is even more interesting, that from Kahoma and Kanaha all the way to Kaua'ula, those lands between there from the L all the way to our valley was the lands of Princess Ruth Keliʻikolani. And once she passed, the land went to the sister, Princess Pauahi, which now is managed by Kamehameha Schools. So in our valley, we have the most important archaeological, how would you say, makamai or treasure, which is known as the Piilani Hawaii. And that Hawaii was also governed under Princess Ruth Keliʻikolani. Where I live, that picture that you showed is a picture that was taken when I was standing on Piilani Hawaii looking down at where my house is and a lot of the taro patches we were able to bring back and restore. That's the exact taro patches. And a lot of the maps that we've had in our family for years also shows the depiction of how many taro patches we have on the top area. And my house is about 80 feet above the river. So even in the river, you got extensive taro cultivation that was happening. How I used to get my water, and I'm hoping that'll continue tomorrow for the next generation, is my water came from Piilani, Hawaii. Piilani, Hawaii was known to be a 9-mile man-made resource Hawaii that traveled from Kaua'ula all the way to Lahaina town, which Lahaina made its name also, not only from the waters that came from Halona and came from Kahoma and Kanaha, but the waters that came from Kaua'ula was extensive. And that's why they known Lahaina to be the Venice of the Pacific, of all the waterways that had in there. And, you know, for our valley, I've raised my kids there. I have 15 grandchildren. That was consumed in this valley, of course. I have families that live on the bottom that's been there for a long time. They live on the Nakaikuana property. That's the Quino and the Daisen Ohana. And we also have families that live probably about 2.5 miles from me, and that's the Palakiko Ohana. And the Palakiko Ohana gets their water from Kauaʻula. From the traditional Hawaii system, I think it was either Mana Pu'uhulili Ole Hawaii that the Palakikos got their water from, either the Pu'uhulili Ole Hawaii or Mana Hawaii. And the history of this place is just ongoing. If people wanted to do more studies on the bountifulness of this place, Hewa'i Mo'olelo o Kaua'ula, written by Kepa Mali. He did an extensive study. A lot of the titles that they researched, they not only transcribed it, made copies of it in native testimony, but it's also in foreign testimony too. It's in English. So because of that, that's where our heart was, to really understand the lay of the land and how many lo'ikalo we had in this area. It was extensive. The work was extensive. And also, our family has been recognized in 2001 by the Maui Lanai and Barrow Council as lineal descendants to that valley because of a lot of the information we brought forward to show the Barrow Council of who was buried well. And we came into the Barrow Council an extensive amount of over 2,000 barrels that were in Kaua'ula Valley. And that's kind of the thing that really got me really involved was the protection and preservation of not only the barrels but also the sites. So that's why half of my time throughout my life living in Kaua'ula, instead of planting kalo, I was putting together my my work or correspondence to make sure that we're part of the solution and never the problem. So understanding how to gain the status of lineal cultural descendancy, how to get the state to make sure that we do whatever we need to do to protect those iwi kupuna or barrels that are located by filing the simplest registration form. Right. Back then, I would say maybe 15, 18 years ago, it was simple. Now all of a sudden, they're giving us the runaround, saying that, you know, in order for them to go up to Kahoma to do a site visit, they would have permission from the adjoining landowner. Never before I heard that we needed to have permission for somebody who does know nothing about iwi kupuna or barrels that the families know, and the extensive work the families try to do has been given the short end of the stick, because it all boils down to liability when it comes to the part as to where the state is responsible to making sure that we protect iwi kupuna, especially when families put together the registration form to go for it and try to do those things.
Um,
We're getting shafted.
yeah.
So because I've sat on the Barrel Council for a long time, Kaua'ula to me has been 100% priority to make sure that the CCNRs and covenants, the crossing the T's and dotting the I's, all these kind of things. And now I'm starting to understand, starting to figure out we're getting a lot of resistance. And it only tells me that our resistance come from people who have unethical value in being affiliated with the private sectors, and they're not literally there for the the Kanaka, or literally there to make sure that these permitting is supposed to be um, set when they start doing certain things like our roadways, laying infrastructure in pipes because they're getting ready for doing subdivision, the permitting. They're saying that they're exempt from doing those kinds of things.
Mhm.
A lot of issues that our families are facing, like this picture right here, that the workers of this company comes in and decides to take out family gates because they claim they have an access right through those areas where families have lived in those areas for generations and generations. Now all of a sudden, the new land company claims that he has an easement right to go through there, and we have no right putting up the gates. The gates is literally to protect our kupuna, to protect our family, especially at this time. The gate was put up because of COVID. That was the whole reason as to why we needed to protect ourselves, because of a lot of people that was just coming into our area and claiming that they were given a lease, like a 5-year lease to come inside there and live and build a house. And this is coming from workers who really don't know nothing about the area, really don't know nothing about whether or not, when they start doing work in an area, that they don't have any guidance from people because they choose not to listen to them because they're working for the person that sold them the property or leased them the property. Same thing that is going in Kahoma Valley right now. Kaua'ula is experienced the same thing. And what I feel is going to happen tomorrow, because I filed extensive complaints with the county and the state on them paving our Alanui, our roads, all the way up to Kaua'ula, because I know they got something planned. And looking at the West Maui general plan, their map on all these extensive development that they want to do inside there is now in front of the CPAC, and it's right in front of the county planning on West Maui's community-based plan. We need to make sure that there is community consultation when these things happen. And right now, because of COVID, I think they found the perfect excuse to just do it and pay for the after the fact fines. And
Yeah,
that's what we're
railroad.
starting to, yeah, and that's what we're starting to see what's happening, is that the county doesn't want to take up a more active role on what they're responsible of doing, telling me that these guys are exempt from putting in pipelines near a cemetery, all these kinds of things, them hardening my road on agricultural lands, and they've gone, I would say, over 2 miles of cold planing my road. And well, I shouldn't say my road, I should say our road, because that's in Alanui. And the Alanui extends from Lahaina town on the bottom and it goes all the way up to the top. So the first thing they do is they cut out the gates, 2 gates. One was on Mill Street, and they cut out my other gate that goes all the way up to my house from the bottom about 5 miles. And they claim to own these things um, within the past 2 years, thinking that they have the right to just come in and do whatever they want to do and jeopardize our lives, because the gate was put in to make sure that we don't have to go through these fires that have been escalating in our neighborhood for a long time. I mean, we went through 3. The last 2 was really big, but the last one in 2012 was the biggest one that it almost held Lahaina town hostage, that a lot of people had to get evacuated from that area. So, you know, understanding what's going on in our neighborhood only tells us that we need to be even more maka'ala, because there is no safety measure when you start talking about how these properties need to be, how do you get, like, abated or brush abatement, to make sure that the general public understand that we have Kuleana lands. We're not hooked up like everybody is hooked up with a public utility. So because we don't have public utility services in our area, we need to be self-sustainable. We need to figure out, you know, our ins and outs. We need to ask, like for me, not only the alanui that gets me to my home back and forth, but we need to also ask the adjoining landowners like Kameme Schools if we could have a memorandum of agreement or right, so we can access that area just in case we get locked in by a fire. We have an alternate escape route to get out of that valley. So there's a lot of things that people really don't understand when you're talking about Kuleana lands. Yeah, we have rights, pertaining rights to these kind of things, but then adjoining landowners like Kameme Schools, we need to work with them to make sure that, you know, they know that we exist. And we also remind Kameme Schools that Princess Ruth Kili Kolani, she was the most defiant ali'i. She refused to speak in English. And you know, that kind of takes on our criteria or character as Kuleana that live in that valley, that we're not going to just lay down and say, okay, you know what, run us over, do whatever you want. That's not going to happen in our area. We'll stand diligent as much as we need to. So within the past, I would say a year, or yeah, about a year, maybe 2 years, the Commission on Water Resource Management did their in-stream flow standard for the 4 valleys from Ukomihame, Olowalu, Launiopoko, and Kaua'ula, and also Kahoma and Kanaha. But they're getting ready to put in monitors. So in Ukomihame, the Commission on Water Resource Management said 2 million gallons go back to the river. Olowalu, 2 million gallons. Launiopoko, they didn't want to affect that because they said, oh, there's not enough water that comes from the valley, so we're just gonna not worry about it. Well, you know what? If there is a possibility for stream restoration, then I think the state should follow through. Kaua'ula Valley was set aside for 3.34 million gallons of water that needs to be in the river, that needs to stay in the river. Then Kahoma, with Kameme Schools saying obligate and dedicate 100% of the water back to the river,
Right.
I think they have a total of 2 million gallons of water.
Yeah.
So if that's the case, that the in-stream flow standard was set, how can these people who buying these lands inside there just all of a sudden think that they can tap the water from the river when the Commission on Water Resource Management already put a cap? So I really, you know, listening to the conversation, I think it was about maybe 2 nights ago, by them stipulating and saying that if you buy lands in Kahoma, you get rights, Kuleana rights to that water. I'm going to follow up with the Commission on Water Resource Management and the permitting department to make sure that if that's not the case, then somebody needs to remind these people, because I think they're selling property with these so-called conditions, which to me sound like they're extorting people to buy into these properties just so they can fire sale these properties, cash their check, and move on. But they'll have those. See, the way I look at it is we're all in jeopardy, not just the Kuleana, but the people who want to buy to give property to their families. That's not even the case, because they're saying that it's a lease and you only get life interest. So big risk. It's going to start happening in Kaua'ula, where I live. We're getting prepared to see how we're going to have to deal with the onslaught We have surveyors that are supposed to be coming up and surveying the adjoining lands of these properties down on the bottom. So what's happening in Kahoma, I know it's going to happen in Kaua'ula.
Thank you. Thanks, Keaaumoku. And you bring up awesome. Thanks for updating us what's going on. So we kind of got an update on what's kind of going on in Kahoma and Kaua'ula. So it looks like burials are being are in danger right now. So that's a big one. And Keaaumoku did bring up the fact that that was one of the first things he did. He was on the burial council, so he did register his the graves, and he did register his lineal descendants, and that's really an important step with the protection of the graves, is actually registering as a lineal descendant, or you can even register as a cultural descendant, but it's actually, I don't know, Lance, is it better to register as a lineal or cultural descendant, you know?
Lineal. Lineals is yeah, lineal, and if you're unable to do lineal, then cultural.
Cultural. Great. Okay, so
Kahoma,
yeah,
Kahoma is still trying to get the state to go up there and register this burial before it's too late. We get people who claiming that they bought property are coming in and already it's starting to move earth and starting to move stones. So I filed a complaint with DLNR to try to get DoCare to come up and look at the violations of what's happening. And I'm not getting anything from them. And the state is telling me that I need to fill out a registration form when a registration form was already filled out by Kamana Inc. It's one of the errors that have been a long time dealing with this. And we're not getting any response. And I think that the staff is in bed with these developers. Sorry.
Yeah. And I want to mahalo everybody who did write a submit a letter to the to the Hawaii State Department of the Hawaiian Historic Preservation Division. And they oversee the registration of burials. We did, as a Kuleana landowner, myself with my husband, we did actually register graves, and it was actually pretty fast. They didn't have to look, they just looked at it and they said, this is a grave site, you know. So it's not even that hard, but from, you know, it just really depends, you know. And right now, Kahoma and Kaua'ula, you guys are going through struggles, yeah.
Was it Molokai-based archaeologists who work for the state who actually did the inventory? Yeah. Maybe they can come. Maybe we should get the ones from Molokai to come over.
Yeah, Molokai was fast. Yeah, Molokai was fast. So, and
what about Keahi? Keahi Bob?
Yeah.
Didn't she text you?
Yeah. So she's open to looking. Her whole dissertation was her area of study is archaeology. So, you know, we do have lots of resources in our community, and with the Kahoma and Kaua'ula issues, we have an opportunity to use the resources that we have to help our fellow Kuleana landowners. And I want to just share a little bit too about and feel free if you guys have any mana'o to share about this, but you know, this is not something new. I'm going to share this. The struggles that we as Kuleana landowners, this is not something new. Here's a Kuleana landowner. His name was Kamai. His house was in the middle of Waialae Golf Course. And Kamehameha schools actually pushed him out. He said he will not sell over. I mean, he didn't. So they waited till he died, and then they took over his lands. These struggles for this is another article. He spurns money to keep Kuleana. This is something, our struggle as Kuleana landowners has been ongoing for decades. This is not anything new. So this is something we as Lahui, you know, we have to support our Kuleana landowners. Here's one struggle in Wai'ehu. This is a sad story of water struggles, again with a large landowner. It was, I believe, the Hawaiian Land Trust Company, and this is in Wai'ehu. They had water, they had an actual spring, and that they used for generations. The Hawaiian Land Trust Company drilled wells near the spring, and then the spring went dry. And then they tried to charge the kalo farmers for the use of the water. So this has been going on, and I just want to say, as Kanaka Maoli, as people of the Aina, as Kuleana landowners, this has been going on for 170 years. 170 years, we have been harassed, we have been pushed out of our lands, we have been silenced. And I want to mahalo like people like Keamoku and Kapali, who have actually given us a voice and made these issues, brought it to the forefront. And when you look at what Keamoku has done too, he's actually won a landmark case, with his Kuleana lands. And that case could be very well, when in Kaua'ula Valley, it's something that we can go back to as Kuleana landowners and say, hey, this is something maybe we can do. But really, our voices as Kuleana landowners, we are really the voice of the land, because we are the descendants of the people of the land, of the tenant farmers, the maka'ainana. So it's important for us and our stories to get heard out there. And I just want to mahalo. So mahalo all of you for coming on the show. And I want to just ask all Keamoku and Kapali and even Lance, like, what can we do? What can we do to support Keamoku and Kapali and your ohanas and your struggles in Kaua'ula and Kahoma valleys? And Lance, like, if there's, what can we do to support Kuleana landowners in general? So we can start with Keamoku.
For us, for the past 2 years, we've been helping families look at, their titles, wherever their titles are, by starting with the indices awards, finding out whether or not they had Kuleana, wherever they had Kuleana. Then we help them look at, a lot of the documents and try to see if we can put, the simplest thing as an affidavit together. So a lot of families know. And we started this affidavit thing because, DHHL has a requirement that you have to be 50% Native Hawaiian. All these other things, amenities for Native Hawaiians, in order for you to claim these so-called things as a Native Hawaiian, you would have to have some kind of way to show that you fall in the, how would you say, the required permitting in order to get services from these kind of areas, such as DHHL. It started off with that. But then it started off with another mission, that families starting to realize who they are, what their kupunas were, because never before, we can do genealogy and we can put the dots together, but really understanding by doing the extensive work, by looking at the native testimonies, foreign testimonies, probates, all this, like census reports from 1878, finding out who was living with your kupuna, where your line comes from within there, by putting together all these documents, clearly shows that we are who we were. Mm-hmm. And that was the impetus to finding on how we can get our families to come together. We used to meet on a regular basis over here at Naikani or Maui Cultural Center in Lahaina. And our classes used to be 50, sometimes even more people to show up, because they're longing to find out who they are, not specifically based on land title. It was just specifically based on their character, their identity, where their kupuna was from, what their kupuna did. And because of all that, the bountifulness of what families learn by going through this simple process of understanding, by coming together and networking with each other, with families from all over the state that comes over here. That was the whole impetus of getting us together, to stand together, to believe in something that we can believe in. And now all of a sudden it's turning into something even way more crazy, when a lot of these families say, hey, Kupuna had property over here. What's the possibility that these Kupunas left these properties over for us? And they did. And this is where we're at now. And now we're facing these so-called adversaries who are trying to claim we're not the person we claim to be by making so-called assumptions, saying that our Kūpuna sold our interests, our undivided interest, our whole 100% interest, and this is where we're at. So first time for me ever in life that a person that is trying to sell properties or TMKs with a warranty title deed would need a genealogist to confirm that the property is clear for sale. So I'm trying to figure out where do we go to address that need when we know that people are being um, manipulated and coerced into purchasing something that might be a problem for them in the future. So it ended up that way. That's the way it's gonna be, and I think that's the reason why the families of Kahoma, like Kapali and Kamana, is holding it down because they know that their Kūpuna left them with something, and it's their job to make sure that it's fruitful today. So mahalo.
Mahalo,
Keamoku.
Lance,
Yeah.
Any mana'o on Kuleana landowners and how to support them?
Well, I think in addition to what Keaaumoku said, I think it's very important that each person become familiar with their genealogy and the history of their family, because that the Kuleana lands tie into that. For I said probably all Hawaiians. I feel very confident that every living Hawaiian has a connection to at least one Kuleana land.
Yep.
But I could be wrong. I mean, but I
No, they do.
confident. So if you don't know what that Kuleana land is, that's your first responsibility, is to know where your family came from and how you're connected to that. And I think also for individuals who may be buying leases or getting some kind of thing from these large land companies, you have to understand that the plantations back at the end of the 19th century, they basically took control over everything. But they tried to, it wasn't just like they had guns and then they were, they did have guns, especially when at the overthrow, but they didn't have guns all of the time. And so one of the ways that they tried to, make themselves seem more legit was that they would have these questionable land titles or deeds that would get registered, even if the person didn't exist. Like in the case of Keaaumoku's land of Apa, somebody made up a name and signed a land deed and said he was related to the original land awardee. And they did that because under the English system of land tenure, whenever you transfer title, you had to have the whole stack of all the previous deeds with you, and everything was written by hand, and occasionally people would make mistakes. So they had this process, the true landowner, and you lived on it for so many years, that if there were a mistake, that the law would forgive that. And what the plantations did was they sort of perverted that process by basically saying, well, if I have this total bogus land deed from somebody who doesn't even exist, if I thought that it was legitimate, then at some point I can go to court and steal somebody's land. So you have to understand that just because somebody 100 years ago supposedly signed a deed, it doesn't mean that the person existed. It didn't mean if the person did exist that they were the ones that signed it. There was a case in Honolua where Maui Land and Pineapple Company was trying to quiet title, and it turned out that the person who signed the deed had passed away 4 years before they signed it. So,
that happens a lot, man.
It happens a lot. So, the thing is, it's very important to know your family's history and its connection to the land, because all of those details, that's the thing, is if you don't know your history, and then either the plantation or the people who bought the claims of the plantation start waving these papers that were recorded 100 years ago at the Bureau of Conveyance, then you have doubt and you're not sure. So eliminate all doubt, learn your history if you don't know it. That's the most important thing. And don't be intimidated that 100 years ago, the plantation got a deed from somebody claiming something, because it may not be true. And that's one of the problems. I think council member Tamara Paulton had asked the chief of police, how do the police decide, when there's competing land claims? It's like, well, you know, how is a police officer supposed to know who the true landowner is when it took the Second Circuit Court 20 years to figure out who it was for Keaaumoku? I mean, how can a police officer understand that, right? And I think the chief of police's answer wasn't really, I think what they need to do is they really need to think out what exactly are the standards by which, you know, when there's a land dispute, because it's generally a civil matter. In fact, I mean,
It is a civil matter.
really the police can't, or the sheriff can't remove somebody from land unless they have a court order, you know, a writ of ejectment or an injunction or something like that. So, I mean, it really is those kinds of issues really need to be resolved in courts where everybody's allowed to prove their case, as opposed to this plantation system where the police just become an adjunct of the people who are purporting to control the land. And so it's very important. So anyways, I don't want to keep going on, but it's very important. Know your history, know your family's history, know your connection to your lands, you know, and don't allow someone to claim that they're the owner of a land just because they say so.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. Thank you. Thank you, Nat. Don't be intimidated. That's a good one.
Absolutely.
Stand your ground and video them.
Yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah, I wanted to say something real quick.
Yeah, no, yeah. Can we end with you, Kapali?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Lance, and thank you, Uncle Keaaumoku, for you know, summing that up rather nicely. And you know, just to add to what they were saying as well, the fact that we here in Lahaina and we've never left this place, our family has always been here, tells you something already, that we are connected to this area. We have a deep connection to this place as lineal descendants. But that being said, our pilikia that we have today regarding our Kuleana lands ultimately is that of a result, the result of the plantations usurping control of our lands from our ali'i and from our people at the end of the 19th century. So we need to put all of this within the colonial context. In order to have a really good understanding of what's happening here, we need to think about it in terms of how the plantations forcefully try to assimilate us. Yeah, the reason why we don't know our history, the reason why we don't speak our language today, who did that benefit? It benefited them, you know, and they did it systematically through the Department of Education. No, they did it through a coercive political and economic system, and controlled our society. So a lot of, I mean, if some of our families did sell lands, it was done during that time when the plantations were most coercive and most intimidating. Our kingdom was in shambles because of them and because of their collusion with the United States. And that's where that is the root of our pilikia today, is all of those surreptitious dealings between the United States and the plantations. This is a plantation system that we're living under, a very progressive, I must say, progressive plantation system, because they've morphed into the current tourism industry, the current development. The land barons today are just, you know, another form of a plantation. You know, they still continue to control our lands and our resources. And my heart goes out to everybody, all the Kuleana landowners out there in Kanaka world who are fighting these same battles. But we definitely need to get together. And I know that we have a right. We still have our rights to our lands and to our sovereignty. If we didn't know anything else, just know that we have our land. We have our rights to our lands and to our sovereignty. It's not like we're seeking to obtain those things. We're already endowed with those rights. We're just not exercising them.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. You got to assert your rights. That's the other thing. Yeah. Thank you, Kapali. So I want to mahalo everybody for coming on. It's a great discussion. And you know what? We only even scratched the surface. of how complex it is.
Absolutely.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
you could have a whole discussion on divided interests, right? I mean, that could be one whole workshop.
Allodial land, or what does allodial mean? You know, we could be talking a lot about it.
So
Yeah.
I want to mahalo Keaaumoku, Kapu, and Lance Collins, and my
Mahalo.
old friend Kapali Keahi
Mahalo.
for coming
Mahalo,
on.
Lance.
Yeah, mahalo,
Mahalo,
Duty.
Lance.
And mahalo everybody
Mahalo,
for
everybody.
tuning in. And we'll be on hopefully again soon with Lāhui Updates with another topic. But check out our link to submit a letter to the Historic Preservation Division in support of Kaua'ula and Kahoma on the KaLahuiHawaiʻi webpage. And there will be a burial council meeting for Maui this Wednesday, so you can probably watch that on Zoom as well. Aloha, we'll keep you updated. Aloha.
Mahalo. Aloha.